Welcome to the Jam Yearbook. I'm Matt.
And I'm Jim.
We're here to take you on a journey through the years as we explore the music in our lifetime and the impact it's had on us and the world we've lived in.
A precursor to this episode. Matt and I, if you didn't know it by now, yes, we're Gen Xers. If there is any year that was supposed to define our generation musically, it's going to be 1991. So strap in and brace yourselves. We're going to try to keep it moving, but this episode will probably go beyond our 45-minute to an hour range. We'll try to reel it in the best we can.
Yes, but before we go too far, everyone knows how we start the show by now. We have a regularly scheduled visit from the Reaper. Apparently, life thought it hadn't messed with Def Leppard enough because we lost guitarist Steve Clark. And we also lost Leo Fender. He's responsible for some mighty legends, having designed the Strat, the Telecaster, the P-Bass, and Fender's Bassman amps.
Oh, yeah. Hendrix, Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Leo Fender basically invented their sound, if you want to look at it that way. He never actually learned to play. He wasn't a player himself. He was just an engineer, a designer. As someone who played a precision jazz bass for many years, I've got a lot of gratitude for this man. And then sadly, on November 24th, Freddie Mercury died of bronchial pneumonia resulting from AIDS. To this day, I think he's bigger than anyone here in the UK. His stature in this country is definitely larger than Zeppelin or The Who, and even arguably the Beatles. His legacy, it's going to last for generations here.
And then on that same day, Eric Carr, drummer of Kiss, died from heart cancer. He's not the legend Freddie Mercury is, but I spent hours listening to Kiss growing up. His style of playing was such a departure from Peter Criss. He helped their shape well into the 80s.
That's really a shame about Eric Carr dying on the same day, because I think that probably got buried underneath the death of Freddie Mercury. But
yes, it did.
yeah, definitely an influential drummer. All right, so let's get beyond the deaths, Matt.
Yeah, at the start, you said that 1991 was the year that defined our generation musically. I'll double down on that comment and say it defined Gen Y as well. For people may be confused, Gen Y are the millennials, but that term seems to come under fire. So I'll just say Gen Y. The cutoff between X and Y is 80-81. People born near the end and beginning of those generations would be at the prime age for music having a huge impact. And I think 91 is that connective tissue between those two generations. When we were talking about this, your comment caught me off guard. I think most people would associate Gen X with typical 80s music, something you'd hear in a John Hughes movie or something, and hair metal.
Yep.
Personally, that's more accurate, but I get your point. You are not wrong. The first half of 1991 was High School Musical. Then Quentin Tarantino came in and rewrote the script.
Yeah, you're right. I couldn't say that better. And I was living that transition. I went from excessively splashing on Drakkar Noir, always clean shaven, blow drying my hair, and wearing parachute pants.
You weren't a polo man. You were a Drakkar
Oh,
Noir.
oh, definitely. I think I was a Calvin Klein guy, actually. But
Okay.
that we'll get to Marky Mark in a bit. But I went from being that guy to wearing, hand-me-down flannels, ripped jeans, proudly wearing a minimum 5-day stubble. It was like I switched religions or joined a cult. I went from Bobby Brown to Kurt Cobain like somebody had flicked a switch. But you got to be honest, since we were from Vermont, it was pretty easy to do because there wasn't really much fashion sense that we had to go and borrow. It was the look of Vermont. Suddenly everybody started looking like Vermonters.
Yeah, it became like the Seattle look. It's like, no, everybody in the northern part of the country dressed like that.
Exactly. We all need warm clothes.
Yeah, exactly. But just like emo, indie bands, glam, hair metal, grunge had its own uniform. We can't go easy on it because it's beloved. And really, do you ever remember seeing a goatee before 1991 or 92? Probably not. And going forward, we're going to try to keep this conversation somewhat chronologically and not hop and skip so you'll notice when the change is. But before we get into it, I think Jim has some ranting that he needs to get out of the way.
All right. Yep. I'm going to rant just a little bit. I'm going to start with a man I respect so much for his amazing work, because it's so hard to say this name and think about everything that his name's attached to. But I want to talk about Quincy Jones's bullshit 7 Grammys for his album Back on the Block.
Yeah, we were asking ourselves, when can we shit on the Grammys? Well, yeah, 1991 is a really good place to start. Quincy Jones on this album, he's credited for lead vocals on only one song. So it's weird that it's a Quincy Jones album, kind of like he was the producer, much like how on Kanye West albums,
Mm-hmm.
you see you get a lot of guests going on. But that first song, that rap is horrible.
It's terrible.
It's awful.
I'm back on the block.
Yeah, and he's got credits on songs, 3 songs for hand claps. It's like I didn't know we needed credits for hand claps. Don't you have 808s for that anyways? That's pretty granular. It's probably only funny to me. It's like he had scraps of ideas to produce an album for somebody else, and it failed. And I'll be honest, just like you, this one hurts a lot because it is Quincy Jones.
And you have to wonder, was music so bad in 1990 that when the 1991 Grammys rolled around, they basically just used it as an excuse to give out 7 Lifetime Achievement Awards to Quincy Jones?
Good time for it.
It's not a bad time. But then what happens next? We have MC Hammer winning Grammys from an album that didn't have any music made on it. It was all samples.
Well, okay, but that's the rap game largely. And is
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is this
true.
kind of a reflection on what you feel about the Grammys now? I mean, you weren't pulling for Hammer at the time.
Oh no, don't make any mistake here. Please, Hammer, don't hurt him was full of Jim Jams.
Okay, I thought so. If I was remembering correctly.
Yeah, it was. But I don't remember the ceremony. But if he was performing, I was probably tuned in and watching it. So this is all retrospective, looking back now.
Okay.
The early 90s shifted a lot of my opinions around pop music. Pop music's in the moment, and I was still easily caught up with this in early 1991. So yeah, I suppose it's a good time to admit to you I also had the Quincy Jones album.
Oh, you did.
I did. I own both of
Oh,
them. I'm ranting about it, and then I'm like flogging myself over my back for having
I'll
done
admit,
this.
until you brought this up in our chat, I had no idea this album even existed. So this was a fresh listen. It was not very good at
I'm
all.
very sorry.
But we've obviously lost touch with the Grammys. We don't rely on them or the charts to tell us what we should like. We're well beyond that. We're old enough to know better now. But it's good to talk about because it can help explain the state of music at the beginning of 1991.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to talk about all the music that comes out in 91. There's a lot to go through. People, like we said, brace yourselves. You're going to sit there and think to yourself, wait a minute, that was 1991. That was because Matt and I had the same reaction. The year is so divergent musically that you're not going to believe all of this stuff came out in the same year.
Yeah, it seemed there became a moment where time almost stopped because you were just inundated.
Yeah. Well, we were getting a steady diet of Madonna, Janet Jackson, Phil Collins, Gloria Estefan, Whitney, Mariah, Sting. He'd gone full adult contemporary. There were bands like Roxette with just so many nice sounding records. They all kind of sounded the same, but they all sounded good. They were ready for the radio and they were eating up the airwaves and they were front loading all of the charts.
And hair metal was running its course too. Former powerhouses like Motley Crue, Rat, Poison, they were at the point in their careers where they were relying on greatest hits and live albums. Skid Row, they kind of got in the game late. Slave to the Grind came out in 91, and that was their second album. And what probably surprised a lot of people is they came out and that album was a lot harder than their first.
But it also debuted at number one.
It did, but it kind of maybe shadowed the end of hair metal with the song "Get the Fuck Out" as well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's always exceptions though. Van Halen's "For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge" was their last great album. I don't think anybody could argue differently. I'll never call them hair metal. but they get lumped in because anything with a loud guitar, and Sammy Hagar kind of had that look at the time, so they kind of got lumped in there as well.
I also think a lot of hair metal guitarists borrowed from the style of playing that Eddie Van Halen
Oh
had
hell yeah,
created. Yeah.
hell yeah.
But Eddie was a keys guy as well. And come on, if I say the song right now, you're going to think one of two things. You're going to think of that keyboard intro, almost as iconic as Jump. It had one of those very first music videos that had a lot of like words over the screen, and you were just
Oh yeah, right now,
mesmerized.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sitting there watching that video. Right now, somebody is, arguing about something somewhere, and right now something's happening here, and right now something's happening there. I'm sure we could come up with some pretty inappropriate jokes around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of hair metal was formed around an amalgamation of trying to have a lead singer that emulated that Robert Plant falsetto soprano voice and copying the guitar style of Eddie Van Halen. Because, there are a lot of really clean, slick solos
Yes.
in hair metal.
Yeah, it's essentially kind of like a poppy Led Zeppelin,
Yeah.
really.
Yep.
And I remember one of the oddest concert pairings ever was when I saw Alice in Chains open for Van Halen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just music and the people, and it was just all over the place. Doesn't mean it was bad. It was awesome. And we're not saying that there was no decent heavy metal around, or at least I'm not saying there wasn't any decent heavy metal around. I don't know how much of this Jim was listening to between MC Hammer. Uh, Mr. Biggs, Lean Into It with the help of To Be With You was a hit.
Oh, come on. That was a pop song. I was definitely listening to Be With You.
What wasn't when it really came to a successful hair metal band,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
You
Yeah.
know, but I'll listen to anything with Billy Sheehan. He
Mhm.
and Paul Gilbert, they helped give Mr. Big, while hair metal, they gave it an air of respect because those two were incredible musicians. And Eric Martin's voice, he's one of the better ones out there too. Very dynamic. I actually still really like that album. I didn't think I would. I thought I was going to kind of cringe when I heard it, especially To Be With You, but I'm like, no, man, this thing still holds up.
I went back and listened to this trying to kind of pick up some of that Billy Sheehan magic because you talk a lot about him. And I don't know if I had the same experience. I had on my HD headphones, I was tuned in, but I had a hard time making out where his bass sits in the mix. I can't knock the musicianship overall. And you're right. Eric Martin's such a good singer for the genre, but there does come a time where some of the songs do get a little cliche for me. To Be With You, though, like I said, I was listening to that. That was a really good song, still is, and it's probably outlasted most all of the other hair metal ballads.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. And I'll agree with you, Billy Sheehan. He uses pedals and some effects where, yeah, it's hard to pick him out. He does kind of sit in a frequency range that's similar to the guitar, but that's where the
Mhm.
producers got to do a better job as well. And your biggest point there is again, hair metal ballads. Most of, if not all bands in that genre, they had to have a strong ballad to attract fans. So, okay, enough hair metal because there's really not enough to cover, and I don't want to go too into my niche knowledge of it because nobody really gives a shit.
I'm sure the people tuning in to listen to 1991 are really like, "What the fuck?
Yeah.
Hair
Hey, Matt,
metal."
how was that White Lion album in 1991? Oh, you know what? Main Attraction's actually a pretty good album. But I don't think anybody's going to go listen to it based on that bullshit recommendation. But moving on from that, there was some pop adjacent music as well that was getting really slick. I don't know why I'm hesitant to call Marky Mark hip hop, so I call it pop adjacent. Kind of like,
Yeah,
well, no, KLF would be dance music, I guess.
that would be.
3
Yeah, yeah.
a.m.
Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, music for the people. First of all, I just wish I could go back in time and put a shirt on him because I probably lost a girlfriend or two because of those abs that he had. And I'm gonna have to admit to you here now that also, along with my hammer, along with my Quincy Jones, I owned the Marky Mark cassette. When I was at college, I actually deemed Good Vibrations to be my dorm room theme song. And I'd put it on after we'd probably had a few or smoked a few, and put on a disco ball in the middle of the room, and we'd all get up and dance on the chairs and on the bed. And it was a lot of fun. It was, we were idiots, but it was a good time. And I know it's probably something that you hated at the time when it came out, but I was having a lot of fun to it. So at the same time, I'm glad that he just made that one album and then he stopped and became the award-winning best actor of all time.
Of all time. Hey, I've watched more than a dozen movies he's been in. He's been successful.
He's decent enough in what he does.
Yep, and his delivery, there's just something kind of funny and cool about it
And nobody
when
does
he's
a better,
acting.
like, confused, angry, cross-eyed, like, kind of look like, oh, what's going
Yeah,
on?
like, what?
Yeah,
What did you just
exactly.
fucking
Yeah, it's like,
say?
what did you just say? That is his look.
There is an album that Jim and I both share a big love for, and I was a little surprised. I didn't know this was on your radar at the time, but Tragically Hip, Road Apples.
Yeah.
The Hip, they're one of those bands where it's close to impossible to pick a favorite album, but Road Apples is near the top. Great driving record. Drive around, belt
Hmm.
these songs out with Gord. And one of the things that's a requirement for me when I go like car shopping is how well can I use this car steering wheel as a drum set? Because I gotta bang it out. But Little Bones, Cordelia, Long Time Running, Fiddler's Green, this album is front to back a great album. And you
Yeah.
know how people say, oh, an album's a 10 or whatever. For me, an album is a 10 if there are no skips. And this album's a 10 for me. There's no skips. There are different gradations of 10. And all 10s aren't the same.
Hmm.
But for me, this album's a 10.
It's so good. And we talked at the start of the show about Freddie Mercury. Queen, they released Innuendo as what we didn't know at the time really was a goodbye album because it came out at the start of the year. But I think at this point, the world knew what was going on with Freddie. He hadn't looked well in any of his public appearances, even though he'd always been denying any illness. It was such a good throwback album in so many ways. It really didn't have the massive radio hits, but it still sold really well around the world.
Freddie wanted the work to succeed on its own merit. Queen hadn't recorded a song, let alone an album like Innuendo in years. Just distinct different parts that flow together masterfully. It's a big, majestic recording full of great songs. It's worthy of the Queen name.
Mm-hmm.
Headlong, Going Slightly Mad, These Are the Days of Our Lives, Show Must Go On. To me, they're all classic Queen. And then REM released Out of Time, the album that broke them out to a worldwide audience. They were a culty sort of college radio. There's a term we haven't really passed around too much,
No, yeah.
but they were like a college radio band before this album. And I know a lot of people our age in high school, they'd listened to this band faithfully well before this album released. There's always that group of kids in high school that were into REM before they broke.
Yeah, man, over here, I was one of those kids. That album propelled them, like you said, their worldwide recognition. I went back and gave it a listen this week. And this album has both the past and the future of REM on one album. Losing My Religion was the path they were going to head down, but Texarkana had that classic REM college radio vibe you're talking about. And everyone likes to hate on Shiny Happy People, but I love that song. Go pick up a guitar, learn how to play the riff. It's really fun to play. And I know there are probably people out there groaning about me saying that, but I love it. It's good.
Oh no, I can't believe that song got hate. I love that song.
Yeah.
That's one
I,
of my favorite REM songs.
I think it was just the old school REM fans gatekeeping the band that they loved so much, and they were bitter about the popularity.
I can see that. Yep.
All right, here we go, Matt. We're gonna get to this part of the show that everybody's probably gonna be waiting for, but before that, we have to do some name checking. There are still some albums coming out that people are gonna be like, "What? This came out?"
Yeah.
So start us off.
Okay, there was a personal favorite of mine from 1991. There's a few, but probably one of the most favorites is Crash Test Dummies, The Ghosts That Haunt Me. I remember seeing the video for Superman's song on Good Rockin' Tonight with
Oh
Stu
yeah.
Jeffries on CBC. I got the album and I was really confused. I had no idea what I was in for, and it definitely was not the folky rock that I heard, but I dug this completely. I was totally in from the very beginning. This was so beyond anything that I was listening to at the time, but this is one of my favorites from 91.
And then after the Crash Test Dummies, we had Temple of the Dog. This was kind of a combination of Soundgarden and Pearl Jam members together. It had a couple of good songs, and it was a great tribute to Andrew Wood, who had been the lead singer of Mother Love Bone and passed away before Eddie Vedder stepped in. But I heard it after Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. I think it came out a little bit later, and it really broke through more maybe in probably 1992. And by then, I had a little more liking individually for those bands. So this album didn't really excite me as much.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I liked it when I heard it, but actually, I think this came out like February of 1991, and nobody gave a shit because Nirvana and Pearl Jam hadn't hit yet.
Yeah.
But once they did, people started getting into Hunger Strike. But but it was one of those albums, or it is one of those albums now where you kind of feel a little uncomfortable saying anything bad about it because you don't want to seem too critical, but it's just okay.
It's okay. It's okay. But an album that was great was Primus Sailing the Seas of Cheese.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Like a few of the 1991 albums that broke through in the grunge scene, it probably took me another year or so, and it maybe even by the release of their next album, Pork Soda, to go back and fully appreciate Sailing the Seas of Cheese. But I absolutely love it now. John the Fisherman, Tommy the Cat. If you don't know that by name, if you know the Bill and Ted soundtrack, that was on that with Tom Waits doing the vocal part of "Hey baby, do you want to get down with me? Hey baby, do you want-" Yeah, it's so cool.
I want to stop and listen to it now.
Yeah, you need to. Les Claypool, he's a master bassist, but also one of the greatest showmen.
And we can't forget Jerry was a race car driver. I cannot believe that one person gets all of that sound out of a bass guitar.
Nuts.
Primus is like it's an arts and crafts show. It's a complete it is a complete creative showcase.
Yeah, it is.
And one of Jim's all-time favorites, the Smashing Pumpkins. They released their debut album Gish. But and I'll refer to you because you are more of a Pumpkins fan than I am. Was most of the attention on Gish brought about after the fact, after Siamese Dream had come out? Because I really don't remember that much about this album at the time.
No, I think maybe Rhinoceros had been on MTV Alternative Nation back then, music videos. I think that was a late night, show before
Yes, it
they'd
was.
kind of taken over.
It maybe
Uh,
even showed after the metal show, whatever they had, Headbangers
yeah,
Ball.
you're right. That might have come first, and then it was Alternative Nation. I would say, yeah, the majority of Pumpkins fans that liked Siamese Dream then backtracked to Gish pretty quickly because the Pumpkins were touring and still playing a lot of these songs. And Gish is a great album.
Yeah, it is. I liked it.
Yeah, and if you ever decide to pick up a bass and learn how to play Rhinoceros, it has the same lead line as Hey Joe when you get to the end of it.
Oh, really?
It does. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Do,
Yeah,
do,
I do know
do,
what you're
do,
talking about.
do, do, do,
Okay.
do,
Yeah, I
do.
get it.
But it stops.
Holy shit, I can't believe I didn't pick that out. I'm usually like a stickler, like, no, I know that you're ripping somebody off. I'm usually that guy. Oh, I'll have to go back and listen to it because I didn't pick up on that the first
Yeah.
time. You know what's really great about bringing up this album, Gish, right now? Because not only is 1991 going to reset the music industry, and it's coming, folks. Trust me, it's coming. But there's also a foundation being laid for the mid 90s alt rock scene, along with
Yeah.
the Pumpkins. Lenny Kravitz is chugging along in the
Hmm.
background, right? Kind of minor hits before he's going to really hit the sunshine. Green Day, they put out their first albums. Blur, Live, those bands are just getting started. Another 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, these bands are going to be big.
Yeah. Live, I had their first album, and they were very, very important to me in the early 90s. The first three songs off that album in 1991, Metal Jewelry, they're staples of mine. I've got a story about throwing copper that I'm going to talk about down the road, but yeah, I've got good stories about live. But
Is
really,
Pain Lives on the Riverside one of the first three songs?
oh, it is. In fact,
Is
I
that the first
stole,
song?
yeah, I stole the bass riff from that for one of the Cinderblock Baby songs
Oh, are
for the
you?
band I was playing
I
with.
I think everybody stole that bass line.
Yeah, it's worthy. It's worthy.
It is. Yeah, it is.
All right, but before we get moving on with the show here in July, there's one big event that wasn't an album. It wasn't a release of music. It took place, but it was going to assist in the generational shift of everything we're going to talk about.
Perry Farrell. He launched the first Lollapalooza tour. It was designed as a farewell to his band Jane's Addiction. Other acts appearing there, it was like Susie and the Banshees, Nine Inch Nails, Rollins Band, Fishbone, Ice-T, and
Body
Body
count,
Count.
body count,
And
body
then
count.
Rage Against the Machine. Again, some bands in there that are going to be bigger as we go into the 90s.
And this was the start of the touring festival, something that went on throughout all of the 90s. It gave the audience of these bands a chance to see them on a major tour and also exposed them to a bunch of new bands and also exposed the fans to a bunch of new bands possibly on the same day. This tour shaped a lot of the entire decade for the industry.
But there's also stuff that is far away from that edge of music. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Into the Great Wide Open. Way to shift gears, Matt, you say. Yes, I do. And I dared to. Because I love this record.
It's
All
so
of it.
good. It's so
It
good.
is. It's laid back. It's chill. It's easy to sing along to. It's completely non offensive. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just a great record. Love
Mhm.
all of it. But Jim, as much as I loved Tom Petty's album, there was something I really got tired of, and it hurt a little bit because I used to really love Brian Adams. But everything I do it for you. The song that remained at number one for 7 weeks from July to the beginning of September really made me dislike Brian Adams a whole lot.
Yeah.
And pop songs, obviously, they're going to remain at the top spot for most of the year.
It doesn't really surprise me because pop always wins in the end, as much as that annoys us.
God
And
damn it. I hate that sentiment, but it's the
with
truth.
it is with this was one of those songs you couldn't escape. The Robin Hood movie was one of the biggest movies of the year, and it was connected right to it, hip and hip. And while we know we're not going to step too far away from the grunge that had a bigger impact on us personally, there were huge pop, country, and hip hop releases coming out at the same time in 1991. If there had ever been a 5 month period in music to name check just by release, you just said this song remained number one until the beginning of September. Well, here we are, August through kind of the end of the year.
It got big.
Yeah, this period, it just wasn't about grunge. Yeah, there's 44 days we're going to come up and talk about that changed music history, but this isn't a wildfire. A lot of these bands slow burn into 1992. So that's why the pop music is still dominating the charts.
Yeah. And when we get to 1992, it's going to be impossible, really hard for us to not talk about some of these bands because they lingered in 91. They just couldn't break through everything that had amassed in front of them. But when they did, they kicked down the door and it completely changed the landscape. But August was the first monster month. Metallica released their self-titled album, or the Black Album as everybody likes to call it.
It's the Bob Rock album.
Yeah, the Bob Rock album. 16 times platinum, five
Wow.
singles. This record is one of the reasons why some of the next ones we talk about are going to be slow burns into 92. Metallica improved their sound. They got a little bit of sludge to them. They kind of gave up on those longer 9-ish minute songs that they would do. It was definitely tailored more for mass consumption.
Yeah, this album was it was just absolutely massive. Nothing else matters. It was all over the place. And suddenly, it seemed like all the people who used to talk shit about Metallica couldn't get enough of them.
So, metal, right? Metallica comes out with Sad But True and The Unforgiven. And while they're not ballads, they're slower songs, but they're still heavy,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of times heavy metal can be thought of as pyrotechnics and
Hmm.
speed. But no, man, sometimes it's about the sludge, it's about the heavy, the chugging, and just the mood that it creates.
Yep.
Let's get away from the heavy though and get to the spin doctors. Yeah, I'm gonna change direction again. Pocket Full of Kryptonite, another album that we had to kind of wait until 92 for it to really gain its full effect. But man, it did get traction. Man, this was inescapable as any of them.
Yeah, this was a WEQX
Special?
special. It with the radio station we spoke about on the 1993 episode is credited with helping break the album. It was getting college radio airplay, but EQX was being watched and copied around the country. They had won one of the Rolling Stone Awards for Best Radio Station. And when they started playing Little Miss Can't Be Wrong, other commercial stations started picking it up. I had the chance to see the original lineup in 2010, and they were amazing. They still sounded great. I feel bad because there were only like 50 people that went to see them that night.
Oh, that's so rough.
They still put on a show for 50 people.
Oh, that's good.
It was phenomenal. It was a good time.
That's good. You made me cringe because I'm thinking of going out on stage and seeing that few people there
Yeah.
and all of the things that you can go inside yourself and think
Mhm. They
negatively
just
about that.
absolutely appreciated the fact that
Oh,
anybody turned
good,
up. Yeah.
good, good. Total Wet Sprocket, Fear. It's a little bit forgotten now, but and even it's a platinum selling album, 5 singles, a couple in the top 20, but you don't hear much about this group or this album now. But Fear is a great album.
Yeah. It's a big album for me. I owned it and loved it. And I was just at the time starting to play acoustic guitar. So this was the sound I was following. I'm going to talk about this later.
Oh, okay. Hint, hint. This was the first CD I bought at the Record Rack in Bennington. I realized that I had been relying on friends to actually hear this album, and I never made a copy. I never made a mixtape with it. So, yeah, I had to get Fear.
Nice.
And you wouldn't know how legendary it is, but 10 by Pearl Jam is actually one of those records that didn't catch on until 1992. A 13-time platinum selling album is a slow burn.
And this is one of those definitive albums of our generation. It's one of those albums that carries deep meaning to so many people I know. Sorry, I'm
Mhm.
laughing about it because just looking back on that means something to me when you're young. But it did. It really did. And and these guys,
Something's happening.
something's happening. They were the antithesis to hair metal. Eddie's baritone vocal was the refreshing sound after a couple of generations I talked about earlier of the high pitched falsetto singing. It was easier to sing along to him as well. In his lyrics, if you could understand them and what he was saying,
It's
they were
like a
poignant.
Muppet with marbles in his mouth.
Oh, yeah, but they were poignant and timeless.
Yes, they were. And this, I will say that Pearl Jam is probably the most meaningful band for me coming out of this grunge scene. And going back all the way to the beginning of the show about saying how, 1991 defined our generation.
Mhm.
This is where I will wholeheartedly agree with you because while we had our big moments, Michael Jackson, right? That was a big moment for our generation.
Yep, yep,
This was a change. This was a sea change
yeah, yeah.
for our generation. That's where wholeheartedly I agree with you.
And there are a couple of other bands coming up we're going to talk about, and we talked already about my love for the Pumpkins. But I think when I look back and romanticize this era, the band that if I were going to say I have that emotional love for that, got me in that
Yep.
place inside. And that's why I pick on it a little bit about it meaning something. Eddie Vedder, he sang from a place inside of himself that I think a lot of people could really relate to, or touched on things that might not have been relatable in your life personally, but allowed you to take those lyrics and shift them into a way in your own life. And then, come on, man, the music of this
It's
album
awesome.
is just
It's great.
so good. If you ever want to go see something incredible, go watch when they get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because Dave Krusen, who left the band after this album was made, he was the original drummer. The drums on this album are, in my opinion, one of the things that make it absolutely amazing. I think the story goes that he had a kid and he didn't want to invest his life into the band the same way that they were going to do it. And he wasn't able to join them afterwards. So immediately after the album was done, David Brucey became their drummer and Dave
Hmm.
Krusen moved on. When they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they brought Dave Krusen back on stage to play drums.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a
And
great story.
and if you watch him play with them, it's so right. It's so compared to David Brucey, Matt Cameron, anything else, it's just so right. And you can even see the look on Eddie's face when he's singing along to, he just plays alive with them. But you see
Yeah.
the look on Eddie's face that in this moment, everything is exactly the way it should have been for my entire career. This is,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What could have been?
yeah,
The look of what could have been.
they were never the same after this album. Never the same.
No, and Pearl Jam can kind of, they've hung around, right? Burnout or fade away, that whole thing. They've hung out and they've kind of burned out for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Pearl Jam collected lightning in a bottle. Let's just say that. They had some good stuff afterwards, but they could never repeat what this album was. To me, personally, this
I
was a great
agree.
album.
I agree.
Hey, Jim, I'm going to change direction again.
Uh-oh, shifting gears.
Yep, shifting gears because, well, Garth Brooks, he released Ropin' in the Wind. Uh, there's your collective groan. We
I'm
can all stop
laughing.
now. Groan and choke as much as we like. Garth Brooks was a thing in the 90s. He was huge. This album debuted on the pop charts and the country charts at number one. It had four runs, not just one, four runs at number one for a combined 18 weeks at the top, number one.
Wow.
Platinum 14 times over. He even covered a Billy Joel song, Shameless. And I hate to say this, he made it better.
I knew this album was out there.
You knew it was out, but you probably never heard it.
Well, my dad loved it. I escaped to college and lived in a bubble without any country music where I was. Garth was definitely revolutionizing country music though at the time.
Yeah, he came out at the right time. There was just a dark cloud over country music at the time, and he came out, sounded authentic, sounded like real country. He just improved the sound of country in general. That's as much as I'm gonna gush about Garth.
No, that's fine. Something that wasn't in the notes that I found out just this week when I was looking up stuff, though, was Alan Jackson's Don't Rock the Jukebox also came out in 1991.
Oh, really?
It did.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Trisha
Which
Yearwood had a debut as well.
I think this was maybe a big year for country, but we're not going to do that episode.
No, we're not. I'm not going to say I was in a cult, but college does strange things to people, Jim. And I could have been brainwashed, but I was in a group where there was some Garth Brooks being played and I didn't mind it. They beat me down.
I respect that more than my earlier Marky Mark comments.
All right, but there's another band out there that kind of runs, parallel with hair metal. They're more of a jeans and t-shirt kind of band. Tesla, Psychotic Supper. I've seen this band on tour a couple times with Mark and probably I think even Chris. Um, I can't even remember who the opener was for this particular tour. It might have been Slaughter and Firehouse, which doesn't really help the hair connection. Firehouse was the worst. God, they were bad. But Tesla, great band, great, really great album. They fell off after this, but their first three albums are gold.
Yeah, Tesla's one of those hair metal bands that got respect for being more authentic, I think. And to be
Mhm.
honest, I had Quincy Jones, I had Marky Mark, I had MC Hammer, and I had Slaughter. So I had Slaughter. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But Tesla, they weren't there for the good time that it seemed like a lot of the hair metal bands were. They wanted to make good music. What You Give is a really good song off this album, and it still stands up in my opinion.
And then Ozzy. I hate to put him here because he transcends genres. There's no doubt he was in that pool, with the records he put out in the 80s, Ultimate Sin, No Rest for the Wicked. He was in that pool. But No More Tears was a huge success. Once again, driven by a ballad, Mama, I'm Coming Home.
Yeah, that was huge. That was a big, big song.
But the next two albums were released on the same day as No More Tears. You ready?
Yep.
Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusions, 1 and 2. I couldn't tell you the difference between these two because I never really listened to them. They weren't my thing.
Why?
I
Why?
I
Why? Why?
why? How? It was just annoying to me. Okay, the music was good. Axel was annoying. I probably could have fun connecting with people over these two records, so I kind of regret not getting into them because it's just rock and roll. They did not do themselves any favors by releasing two albums at once. They could have trimmed it down, made, a bigger bloated album out of it, but it was a cool badass thing to do. Like two albums in the same day. There were people camping out for a midnight release of this album. It was hugely anticipated.
Yeah, it was big. And I agree 100%. This should have been a single album. There's really no reason for double albums to exist. Maybe live albums, if you're a super fan and you want to hear everything that's been done on a live basis. But if they'd condense this and release another album in 2 years or save some of those songs or set them aside, they would have probably attained the Zeppelin status that they were looking for coming out of the 80s. Yep.
But I'll also credit here we go. I'm going to give GNR some credit. They had a hand in putting an end to hair metal as well because there was an edge that separated them from the rest of the metal that was around.
Oh,
Guns
definitely.
N' Roses was badass.
Yeah, there
So
was
I think
something.
Guns N' Roses was kind of like the warm-up act for what was going to finally put hair metal to bed.
They did something that transcended what was going on in the normal scene. And, but also in 91, they were all over the place. They had a great lead into the album with If You Could Be Mine, which was released with the Terminator 2 movie a little while
Oh, I forgot
before
about
that.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had the cassette single to If You Could Be Mine, and Civil War was the B side. I learned how to play that song, long before it ever came out. Videos were all over TV, and they toured the album the summer before it was released. And that doesn't happen as much today. I think, bands go on tour once they've recorded and it might not be released just yet, but they were out there playing these songs in front of, 50, 60, 80,000 packed stadiums. It was either a brilliant marketing move or a beautiful mistake, but people definitely went out in droves and bought the album.
Yeah. And once they kind of hit that plateau of like superstardom, right? As soon as Sweet Child of Mine hit, they were put on a pinnacle. And the rest of hair metal was left kind of confused as like, how the hell do we compete with this?
Yeah, they reached a point that couldn't be met.
Okay, I don't know. I really don't know, Jim. how well we've been able to keep this chronologically. But I think we're at September now. So we have two big, huge releases on September 24th: the legendary Nevermind and Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Nirvana and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I heard Nirvana on release day. I heard this the day that it came out. I'd gone to the store with a couple of friends. One was buying Use Your Illusion, and the other one was buying Nevermind. My buddy who was buying Use Your Illusion had a T-top convertible. The CDs went in, and that's what we heard on the whole ride
Holy
home.
fucking Trans Am.
Oh, it was a good time. I remember hearing Smells Like Teen Spirit bouncing out of the rooms and spreading from room to room in my college dorm. And I liked it. But, like I said earlier, I was still kind of dancing around at this time to Marky Mark. So it probably took another 6 months before I became a Cobain wannabe.
I can't remember the first time I heard Nirvana. I just remember hearing the name over and over and over, and then finally caught the video on MTV. I said, "That's great, but what the hell is he singing?" Yeah, yeah. Weird Al did it the best, I think.
Yeah, he did. And the Chili Peppers album, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, we talk about slow burns. That was a slow burn. I know when we were hanging out in the summer of 92, this was, current at the time, but the album had a lot of legs and probably cemented Rick Rubin outside of the hip hop community as a producer.
That's an incredible amount of absolutely legendary historic albums to come out in a short period of time.
That was,
Pearl Jam, Chili Peppers, Nirvana, that's Metallica, that's huge.
yeah, Garth Brooks.
Garth, oh my God. Yeah. And we haven't even really hit on hip hop at all.
No, we haven't. And then we had Anthony Kiedis, in the next year running around with his shirt off.
The new Iggy Pop, I think.
Yeah, but before we leave the week of September 24th, I also want to point out the Ceremony album by The Cult. I had completely missed this album in 1991, and there probably couldn't have been a more unfortunate date to have their release because it was on the 24th, the same day as Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers. I went back this past week and I gave it a listen, and it's really a good album. I probably would have been a fan of this album if music hadn't changed its trajectory.
Yeah. Underrated band, underrated album. It was their follow up to Sonic Temple, which broke them.
Great, yeah,
And then
yeah,
grunge hit. It was just bad timing on their part because it's a good rock band.
it is.
But that dated sound wasn't going to fit in with Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains,
No.
Metallica. It just wasn't going to fit in, which is too bad because I agree with you. The Cult, great band. Ceremony, really, really good album. Hey, Jim, guess what? We're already at October. It's not so legendary, but it's got some history between you and I. What were you to say if I was to bring up Ugly Kid Joe and us playing together?
All right. If we're gonna talk about how I played I Hate Everything About You in our first band, we're probably just gonna bring everything else we just talked about crashing down. So way to halt the show, Matt. Good
Oh,
job. Good
noted,
job.
noted. Yeah, yeah. If anything I can do is bring direction to the show or change of direction to the show and bring it to a screeching halt. But I'm gonna crank it back up again because we got Soundgarden and Bad Motor Finger.
It took me a long time to be a Soundgarden fan. This album was almost great to me. But with everything else that was coming out, I think I originally heard Chris Cornell's vocals as leftover hair metal soprano vocals that I talked about earlier. I hear more in this album now. As retrospectively, I talk about going back and looking, but even as far as 94, 95, I was starting to pick up this album and listen to it more. And I think Matt Cameron's drums just sound incredible on it.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I thought I was the only one that lumped Soundgarden in with metal at first for the exact same reason, his voice. And as I was getting older, seeing the flaws in hair metal, that voice kind of made me stay away from Soundgarden at first. It did relate to metal with me.
Yeah.
But then when I got into it, I'm hearing time changes, longer songs. There's a more freer structure to it. And I have to say, Rusty Cage, great goddamn song. And it sounds a little pumpkin-esque as well.
Yeah, but maybe the Pumpkins actually lifted that sound because I think Soundgarden was more established at this point.
Yeah, and grunge is something I wish we had more time to talk about because it's the change in music as we would go forward. Was this when the term grunge was coined though? It didn't seem to like hit right away, like what to label this. I mean, what box did Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden get into before that title of grunge was fashioned? Is grunge more like a punk metalcore or is even that a thing? Was the name grunge more of a reference to the fashion? I remember people trying to clump collective soul into grunge at first. It's like, no, no, that's not grunge at all. Anybody can wear flannel. It doesn't have to be grunge. Is grunge an example of a dumpster genre where if it's new, we don't really know where it fits, so we're just going to create something, if it came out of Seattle, is it automatically grunge? Can we retroactively call Heart the first grunge band or something like that?
Well, grunge artists in some ways were riding the coattail of Neil Young. He was having a resurgence at the time, great for him. A lot of the grunge bands were complementing his Rust Never Sleeps guitar
Mm,
sound and what inspired them through what they were doing.
yeah, Pearl Jam definitely brought him up a lot.
Oh, yeah. Hart had Ann and Nancy Wilson. They actually spent a lot of time with these young bands in Seattle. If you look up some of the documentaries, you'll find out that they were really involved in the local music scene. There are some great interviews with Ann Wilson about hanging out with the guys from Pearl Jam and Soundgarden.
I think grunge took off like it did because the music world needed a shot of something that sounded honest, sincere, authentic. Pop and hair were so sterile and they sounded contrived. Corporate, they got their fingers into it, said, we need more of X, Y, and Z, and they
Mhm.
forgot about A, B, and C. Once I gave in, I found there was just there was an authenticity in the performances with the grunge groups, the songwriting, deeper lyrical content. Who was singing as passionately as Eddie Vedder? Who gave less fucks than Kurt Cobain?
So here we are then. This is where we reach the end of the mythical 44-day period. Some consider the greatest in music history as far as significant releases go. We said Metallica, Pearl Jam, Guns N' Roses, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soundgarden. We threw in a couple of extra names. I'll count Garth Brooks just because of how many albums were sold. And it means something to somebody. That's fine.
Yeah, it did. And REM, from the first part of the year, it was still hanging around, but we're always on to what's next. And what next was pretty big as well.
Yeah, it was big. U2 followed up their transcendental album, The Joshua Tree, by releasing Achtung Baby in November. And I know U2 has never been a big part of your musical landscape, but I was into U2 through this album, and then it kind of stopped for me. This was my stopping point for them. But the songs on this album, they were really so good. One was overplayed, but I think it was a timeless U2 song. I learned it. I played it with a band back in the day when I was at college. And the song The Fly seemed like it was going to be some kind of new direction. And yeah, the album's kind of dancey in places, which was a shift. I think that was more a sound of what might have been going on over in the UK than what Americans were expecting in those moments. U2 being an Irish band, they were hearing sounds from both sides. But yeah, they went downhill after this. That was fine.
No doubt they did. And I think when you have an album as huge as a Joshua Tree, people just want or maybe expect more of that thing that they loved. Yeah, Octoon Baby, it was a departure from it. And you're right. YouTube, they drift in and out for me. Joshua Tree, absolutely fantastic, impossible not to love. But I also respect bands for branching out and reinventing themselves. But yeah, most of Octoon, it didn't work for me. Yeah, there were good songs, but as a whole, the album didn't have the flow that Joshua Tree did.
Yeah, I can understand that. And then after that, we had Michael Jackson followed up bad with Dangerous. I think it's a safe bet. Neither of us were running out to buy it, though, at this point in our lives.
Was anybody at this point in
Oh,
91?
well, I mean, Black and White came out
Yeah, it
on
was
this
huge.
album, and that was
I'm just being a dick. It was huge.
no, that's fine. I'm sure there will be plenty of moments you're being a dick on this show. But there's a great performance of this where Slash played the guitar on Black and White, and he joined Michael Jackson a few times live playing it. And there's a great video on YouTube where he refuses to stop soloing and kept going on and on and on. And Michael Jackson comes up to him and he tries to keep dancing next to him, like doing a little dance move, and Slash just keeps going. And he does a little dance move and Slash just keeps going. And then Michael Jackson just starts yelling at him, and he's so visibly pissed off. And those were the moments that, for me, gave me respect for Slash and made him the man. That was as rock and roll and just as punk as anything grunge was doing in those
Oh
days.
yeah, because he's telling Michael Jackson, yeah, I know you're still king of pop, but you know what? Pop ain't the only music in town. We got other things going on, and your time has passed, buddy.
Yeah, sit your ass down. All right, Matt. So that is going to be the end of this episode because I think we've talked for a very long time.
We really have.
Yeah, I realize we have not brought any songs to this episode like we've done for the
Why would you think
first
that
few.
is, Jim? Why wouldn't we do
Well, I think
that?
because we're going to make a part two.
Or duh. Is Charlie Sheen going to come in and host with you?
He might. We're going to do a second part of this episode where we just go through the songs and we are going to poll the audience and ask them what they think they would bring to the playlist for 1991. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
You're right, because I got a lot of faith in the audience, what songs they're going to choose.
And the other thing we're going to do is that I'm going to get 10 songs, not 5. Matt's going to get 10 songs, not 5. And the audience is going to get 10 songs. So that's 30 songs from 1991.
Yeah. That's a lot to get through,
It
folks.
is. It is. But the audience will have a choice of 20. So we'll find out what they pick because we always put the poll up and we give them, at least twice as much as, they're going to choose and put on the playlist. So
well, yeah, you can't give them 10 and say 10 are going to make the poll. Let's see what number 1 is. Nah, you got to give them a chance.
yeah,
Give some
exactly.
songs chance to compete.
And we got to make sure they don't pick any of our songs as well.
Well, maybe we're hedging our bets and not talking about or not picking songs that we think the audience will pick.
I think that's a good idea. I do.
Yes. Hey, Jim, it's time for us to wrap up the show. So why don't you head us out of this
I will do that. Thank you
mess?
for everybody listening to version 1991 part un. It's been a lot of fun to talk to you about the music that's
It
come out
has.
this year. And with Matt, we've had a lot of laughs and a lot of laughs over that time in our life that we're going to have to probably edit out of this show.
Sorry, folks, you can't hear what ends up on the editing floor
Yeah,
because when
no.
Jim and I get talking about really reminiscent years and there's more than 3 beers involved, yeah, there's going to be some inappropriate shit that you can't hear.
Yeah, but tuned in. Eventually, we'll have a video on VHS that will be on sale on infomercials at some point one day. Find out what Matt and Jim say. They say the worst.
Oh, yeah, they really are idiots, folks.
Thank you very much for listening. We hope you tune in for part two to hear all of the songs that we pick from 1991 because we're excited to come and deliver these songs to you. Yeah. I mean, come on, man. We've talked the whole year and we haven't even brought our songs. So this is exciting.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that we haven't put too much on our shoulders for 1991 because it is a huge year. I hope we can just relax, go with what we know, and say, yeah, we love this song.
I'm sure Matt will be second guessing himself for the next 3 to 5 years after he makes this list.
I always do, Jim. You know me too well. Because this is a permanent record.
It is.
Damn it.
This is it. Okay, Matt, say goodnight to the good people out there.
Good night to the good people out there, and we'll see you next time for the Jam Europe when we actually finally give you our songs from 1991.
Everybody, peace, love, and podcast.